My name is Mikael Hilmersson. I'm ongoing evaluator of forskare for this project, but I'm also, my main profession is that I'm working as associate professor or docent at the Gothenburg University, and I do research on internationalization of small and young firms. And I've done that. I took my PhD in 2011 and have been studying these issues since then. And I will try to condense the main findings of 15 years of work into 10 minutes, which is a bit challenging, so it will really be a summary. But I would like to highlight the role and importance of networks and networking for understanding internationalization, especially among small and young firms. And of course we talk about internationalization as a way of entering into new geographical markets. And traditionally we have assumed, and that's also the kind of support we've had in the Swedish ecosystem and Danish and Norwegian as well, but if you look at the activities of Business Sweden, for example, it's very much addressing the challenges of entering a new geographical market. And those challenges are often referred to as differences in cultural distances that you need to overcome. It's also traditionally been described that you have the role and importance of geographical distances as well as institutional distances. Institutional distances being very important in this particular industry where we would have regulations and so forth, which would sort under institutional distances. And traditionally in research and in support system and so forth, we have assumed that these kind of differences between the home market and the host market that you're entering causes a liability of foreigners. The liability that you will have in the new market because of you're entering a new country. For a Swedish firm, you will have a liability of foreigners if you enter the German market, for example, because you are not as familiar to the legislation, the culture, traditions, etc., as local competitors are. So a Swedish firm would have to invest time in order to learn and to meet the same competence levels as the local competitors. This means that the firm needs to, in theory, develop what we refer to as firm-specific advantages to overcome the liability of foreigners. So you need to have some kind of uniqueness that actually compensate for your lack of contacts, experience, knowledge about the local market. And traditionally, when we have discussed internationalization, we have then looked at the importance of a market selection procedure. How do you select the markets that you enter? We have also programs looking at entry mode selections. When you have decided on which markets to enter, how should you set up operations in that country? And also, how should you design your distribution model? So these are these key questions coming from our traditional view on internationalization as an event where you cross country borders, you need to handle the liability of foreigners. This is what was central in research on internationalization, but also in the support system until around 10 years ago, where there was a shift in focus in the research community because of new insights, both of more sophisticated research, but also because of changes in the real world, in what you are doing and other firms with you, where researchers started to understand that the main challenge a firm entering a foreign market meets or faces is not necessarily the liability of being a foreign firm. Instead, research is shifting towards, from this geographical picture, from the view that foreigners is the main problem, to networks. So we assume that the main challenge is not necessarily how you enter a new culture across national boundaries, but how you could become an actor in an internationally spread network. So what we see now is that you see a lot of multinational companies that have operations in several countries, meaning that if you're into that, and we describe in research multinational companies as networks, hierarchical networks. So if you're in to this network in one country, you can what we call piggyback, or that you can follow within this multinational company to different geographical locations. We also see an increased trend in the appearance of global value chains. Value chains that crosses boundaries. So if you're into this value chain, into this network, the country borders doesn't really matter to the same extent as they traditionally did. And of course, which is very relevant here, we see a lot of online platforms. Most of us having an iPhone, which is, you have the platforms which are crossing borders. They are not really national, or instead they are international. So we see changes in the industry, where country borders are becoming less important. We also see this change affecting how we view this in research, but also the type of policy that it's designed. So just imagine if you, I think that you all, even though you don't know it, but most of you have used products which has been produced by a firm called Pelly Industries, located in Hillerstorp here in Sweden. They produce all the baskets for IKEA's wardrobes. So if you have a wardrobe from IKEA, they have produced the basket that you put into it. This is a very small family-owned firm located in Hillerstorp, Småland, Sweden. They are selling the product to a global market. But they have not been traveling a lot at all internationally. What they did was that they managed to sign contracts with IKEA. So by entering the network of IKEA, negotiating and becoming a supplier to IKEA, they have a global reach of the product. So they are selling more or less in all countries of the world, but they just have contact with IKEA in Sweden. So what I try to understand is, who are the IKEAs in HealthTech? Who are the multinational companies or the networks that could help you reach a global market without traveling the world? Who could bring your products to the international market? And this is what I'm struggling with now. I have some ideas, but I will not go into them now. I think you know from your own perspectives. But what's important here is that we see a clear shift then from foreigners to network outside-ship. That if we traditionally have seen that when you internationalize, you need to meet new cultures, face different regulations, laws, and so forth, we're now looking at outside-ship to networks. So the main challenge, as we describe it in the research community today, is not how to overcome the liability of foreigners. Instead, it's how to overcome the liability of network outside the ship, or how this actor can become part of the international network. So shift in focus from what is the main challenge then. So internationalization we see as a network entry process. How do you enter a network? And as we know that most networks are actually crossing borders. So if you just enter the Swedish network, the network in Sweden, you might reach an international market. I had students a couple of months ago who worked with a project for elderly care, and they were interested in the German market for elderly care. And what I realized was that if you should enter the German elderly care market, you might not need to go to Germany. Most probably you should go to Switzerland, because most of the owners of elderly care providers and elderly care institutions in Germany were owned by Swiss companies. So if you wanted to reach decision makers for the German elderly care market, you should go to Switzerland. And if you want to go to the global furniture market, you might need to go to IKEA in Helsingborg or Älmhult. So it's not necessarily focusing on countries. So, ways of entering such a network. In research, we see three main strategies of how you enter a network. First, replacing existing network actors by outcompeting less competitive solutions. Second, becoming a net new member of an existing network by adding competences to this network. Or third, connecting previously unconnected network actors. This is different from selecting a national market. It's different from selecting an entry mode. It's how you become part of the network, which is the main challenge. So, first one would be that you enter the network by questioning what's actually being done today, saying that we can actually do this in a more efficient, user-friendly, providing better health way. Second, adding value to the actors that are actually operating in the network today. Or third, that you connect different unconnected networks in the existing market. Some of the challenges that you would face in the situation is that, of course, the liability of being an outsider, the liability of being small, the liability of smallness, which is quite well known in research, that the smaller you are, of course, the harder it is to have IKEA listening to you. What was very clear to me when I listened to Joint Academy, the liability of newness. How you convince the existing market to use a new type of solution. And of course, the earlier you are in the industry's development, the greater this challenge will be. Whether the solution that you have, you need to convince the users or customers to use new, completely new technologies and so forth. And of course, in some cases, it still matters which nation you are from. Two more short slides. One very interesting case that I've been studying on how small firms can join forces in handling these kind of liabilities and challenges. I studied in outside Malmö. It was a project called Sustainable Sweden Southeast, which was an initiative taken when the EU enlargement took place in, I think it was 2004, where the Baltic states and Poland became new EU members, which was a very attractive market for a lot of small firms in the Kalmar, Växjö, Karlskrona region, southeastern parts of Sweden, working with different type of wastewater treatment or environmental solutions. They realized that in order to act on the tenders that took place, funded by EU, to develop the infrastructure and so forth in the former Eastern European countries, they were too small. They couldn't manage it on their own. So even though there was a great opportunity just outside the door of these firms, they realized that we are too small to actually win these tenders. So what they did was that they joined forces. So these companies here, I think there were around 20 or 25 firms, joined forces and created what they called Sustainable Sweden Southeast, which was 2 employees, business developers, that were responsible for finding business opportunities for all of its member companies in Eastern Europe. And they were very, very successful, so they won a lot of tenders. They became part of building the whole new wastewater treatment investment outside St. Petersburg, for example, which they would never have been able to on their own. One very interesting case of how small firms can compensate for the liabilities of smallness and newness by joining forces. I would like just to end with this statement, which is an African proverb, which is very much in line with research insights on the internationalization of smaller firms. That is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you should go with others. And I think this HealthTech Nordic is an excellent opportunity for you to take advantage of in joining forces to make this change. So that's my final words.
Thank you, Mikael.